Have you ever considered that what we proudly call progress might actually be the seeds of collapse? What if every victory celebrated under the banner of freedom has quietly dismantled the very foundations that held our societies together? And what if, at the center of this transformation, stands not a political revolution, but a cultural one led by women? Schopenhauer didn't simply dismiss feminism. He feared it. To him, it wasn't a path to equality. It was the beginning of chaos. He believed that when women rise beyond their traditional roles, society loses its discipline, its order, and eventually, its future. But on the other side of this battlefield stands Simone de Beauvoir, defiant and unwavering. She didn't just defend feminism, she forged it into a weapon against centuries of oppression. For her, the rise of women wasn't the fall of civilization, it was civilization's long-awaited redemption. So today we ask the question no one dares to speak aloud. Is the rise of feminism the fall of civilization? This is the thinking war. Throughout history, every great civilization has stood on a foundation of clear roles, unshakable traditions, and a deep respect for order. But what happens when those foundations begin to crack, not through war or famine, but through a silent revolution? A revolution of thought, of gender, of power. This is not just a social shift. This is the remapping of human civilization itself. For Schopenhauer, the rise of feminism signals the unraveling of discipline. He saw history as a careful balance of order and chaos, and warned that when emotional appeal replaces rational structure, society begins to rot from within. But Simone de Beauvoir would say that this so-called rot is nothing more than the decay of chains that should have been broken centuries ago. She argued that women have not destroyed civilization. They are saving it from the outdated structures that kept it stagnant for millennia. Is feminism the dawn of true equality, or the twilight of the society we once knew? To Schopenhauer, the rise of women was not a sign of progress, it was a symptom of decline. In his view, civilizations do not collapse under the weight of external enemies. They crumble from within, when discipline gives way to comfort, when reason is drowned out by unchecked emotion. And nothing, he argued, unleashed emotional chaos more dangerously than the unchecked influence of women. He wrote that women are governed not by logic or higher ideals, but by immediate desires, survival, security, and comfort. To Schopenhauer, these instincts, while necessary for the family, are disastrous when allowed to shape society. A society led by these values, he warned, becomes soft, sentimental, and eventually collapses. He saw feminism not as a path to justice, but as nature's final laugh at a weakening civilization. When men no longer strive for greatness, and instead seek comfort in equality. When ambition is labeled toxic and sacrifice becomes a forgotten virtue. The empire is already in ruins. It just doesn't know it yet. In his harshest critique, Schopenhauer claimed that the more a society elevates comfort and emotion over duty and discipline, the closer it moves toward extinction. He would point to today's falling birth rates, dissolving family structures, and the epidemic of aimlessness among men as proof of his theory. And so he asks, has the rise of feminism created a better world, or a softer one, waiting to be conquered? Is this liberation, or the slow suicide of a once proud civilization? While Schopenhauer looked at the rise of women with fear, Simone de Beauvoir looked at it with fire. For her, the oppression of women was not a tragic accident of history. It was a deliberate system of control, designed to keep half of humanity obedient, invisible, and silent. She did not see feminism as a threat to civilization, but as the long-overdue correction of a system that had crippled its own potential by suppressing the minds and voices of women. Beauvoir argued that every time a woman is told to stay silent, to remain in the home, to find meaning only in motherhood or marriage, the world loses a thinker, a leader, a revolutionary mind that could have changed everything. She saw the so-called traditional values as nothing more than cages wrapped in gold. Comfortable perhaps, but still prisons. And she asked the most dangerous question of all. What could women become if they stopped living for men and started living for themselves? She did not believe that feminism would destroy civilization. She believed it was the only thing that could save it from the toxic cycles of war, domination, and ego that had ruled for millennia. For Beauvoir, the fear that society would collapse without strict gender roles wasn't a warning. It was a confession. A confession that the old systems were never built on true strength, but on the fragile illusion of male dominance. She stood defiantly and declared, One is not born, but rather becomes a woman. To her, womanhood was not a biological destiny. It was a battlefield of identity, choice, and freedom. So now, the question is not whether feminism will collapse civilization. It is whether civilization can finally evolve, or remain chained to the ghosts of its oppressive past. Is this the fall of the old world, or the birth of a new one? Schopenhauer stares coldly at the horizon and sees nothing but decay. He believes the walls of civilization crumble when women step beyond their ancient roles. To him, every step toward so-called liberation is a step away from discipline, from the iron chains that held chaos at bay for centuries. Without hierarchy, without sacrifice, without men bound to duty and women content within their natural place. He sees a future not of progress, but of soft men, bitter women, and a civilization teetering on the brink of collapse. A world drowning in emotion, starved of greatness. But Simone de Beauvoir refuses to kneel before this vision of fear. She stands defiant and calls Schopenhauer's view for what it is: a frightened old myth clinging to its own death. She argues that what Schopenhauer calls discipline was always just oppression wearing a noble mask. What he calls order was submission, and what he fears as chaos is simply the sound of long-silenced voices rising at last. Schopenhauer fears the collapse of the old. Beauvoir celebrates the birth of the new. Both believe something is dying, but only one believes something greater can be born from the ashes. So we ask you, is feminism the hammer breaking the foundations of society? Or is it the hand pulling humanity out of its self-imposed chains? Look around. The signs are everywhere, if you dare to see them. Birth rates are plummeting. Marriage has become a relic, mocked more often than honored. Loneliness is the silent epidemic of the modern world, and entire generations drift through life detached, disconnected, and disillusioned. Is this the price of freedom, or the cost of forgetting who we were? Schopenhauer would say the collapse isn't coming. It's already here. Soft men, obsessed with comfort. Women, burdened by the paradox of wanting both independence and protection. Families scattered. Traditions discarded. And a future that feels increasingly uncertain. He would point to the empty cradles, the broken homes, the epidemic of meaninglessness. He would say that a society that no longer values sacrifice, duty, and restraint is a society already in decline. But Beauvoir would stand on the ashes and call it a battlefield, not a graveyard. She would argue that the old structures had to burn, that from the ruins of outdated roles and suffocating expectations, a freer, more authentic humanity could finally rise. She would point to the courage it takes for women to reject the chains of history, and for men to rediscover purpose beyond domination. So who is right? Are we living through the final days of a dying civilization? Or are we witnessing the painful birth of something new and better? Look at the world. Look at yourself. Welcome to the turning point. You've walked through the battlefield of ideas. You've heard Schopenhauer's warnings, his vision of chaos draped in the disguise of liberation. You've stood with Beauvoir as she tore down those old illusions and demanded a new world, built not on fear, but on freedom. So where do you stand?